You're watching Book TV on C-SPAN 2. Book TV has traveled to London to talk with some British authors, and we're pleased to be joined now by biographer, historian, and novelist Peter Ackroyd, whose most recent book, A History of England, Volume 2, The Tudors, has recently come out. Mr. Ackroyd, who were the Tudors?
Well, the Tudors were a succession of monarchs who managed to steal the throne in the usual method by war and perjury. But despite their rather suspect beginnings, they imposed their persona upon England in a most remarkable way. If we take the case of Henry VIII, for example, he was the one who engineered, maintained, and subsidized the Reformation in England, turning England from a Catholic to a Protestant country. So we can say that the Tudors, perhaps of all the monarchs of the realm, has had a most important effect upon English social and public life.
Why were they called the Tudors?
They were called the Tudors after Owen Tudor, a Welshman, who was the beginning of their family, as it were, who came from relatively humble origins, but who by tricks or by devices managed to woo and wed a prominent member of the aristocracy.
What were the years of their reign?
Now you've got me. I can't remember all the details of their reign. You just have to say it was the 16th century.
How many kings and or queens served as Tudor kings or queens?
Well, there was Henry VII, Henry VIII, his son, who ruled for a very short time. Then there was Queen Mary, and then there was Queen Elizabeth, and with the redoubtable reign of the Virgin Queen, the line unfortunately came to an abrupt end.
And what happened? Who took over at that point, after Queen Elizabeth I?
After Queen Elizabeth died, the throne went to James VI of Scotland, who then became James I of England.
And was he a Windsor?
No, he was a Stuart, and he was the first of the Stuart dynasty to rule in England itself. Because his mother was Mary, Queen of Scots, there were all sorts of affiliations and ties between the Tudors and Stuarts in any case. So he was the natural choice as the Queen's successor.
Peter Ackroyd, during the Tudor reign, how much power did the king or queen have in this nation?
During the Tudors, the king and the queen had enormous power, administrative, military, political, judicial, and legal. They were the fount of all authority and prestige. The House of Commons in that period, although not just a talking shop, was very much subsidiary to the royal court, and it was the royal court that made all the important decisions. There were occasionally first ministers who arose, one such being Cardinal Wolsey, but their influence was always limited by the king's prerogative, as Wolsey found to his cost.
Now, your first volume, History of England, came out, Foundations, you called that. What does that cover?
Well, that covers everything before the Tudors. It begins at the beginning, which we might take as the Proterozoic slime, and goes right on to the beginning of the Tudor dynasty. It's an overview, if you would like to put it that way, of the medieval period and of what is unfortunately and inaccurately known as the Dark Ages. It's the beginning of England's rise to dominance and authority in the world.
Are you currently writing Volume 3?
I'm currently revising Volume 3 and writing Volume 4. Volume 3 is concerned with the civil wars and the Stuart monarchy. So we have Charles II and we have Oliver Cromwell. And then the next volume is concerned with the Hanovers, the Georges, with the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, and the Commercial Revolution, which of course changed the shape of English society.
Why are you writing a history of England now?
But why not? It seemed the natural thing for me to do. I've written so much in the past about specific periods, specific people, that I thought it best, and I thought it judicious, to try and attempt a panorama of the history of England in its entirety, so that I could look back upon the 6 volumes and say, this is a sort of testament.
Peter Ackroyd, you also write about the history of London. In fact, found a quote of you saying that London is a living being within each of my books.
Yes, London's been a passion, obsession of mine since I began to write. The first novel I completed was called The Great Fire of London some years ago, and I think all of my novels, with very, very, very few exceptions, have as the landscape of their imagination London itself. Whether it's a biography of William Blake or Thomas More, who were Londoners by birth and by inclination, whether it's a novel, or whether it's a history like the history of the Thames, all of my work seems to gravitate around the city and takes its life from the city. That may be because I am a London boy. I've lived in London all my life, and for me it is the source of all my inspiration and certainly the source of all my writing. So it's a powerful magnetic aura that surrounds me.
One of your recent books is London Under, and what can we learn about the study of the underground of London?
Well, the underground of London comprises not just the subway system, it comprises all the pipes, the labyrinths, the unknown waters, the unknown rivers, the wells of London, the deep defence capabilities of London. The London beneath the surface is almost as large and as complex as the London above the surface, and it's a subject which is not often handled by historians or biographers, so I thought it was one which I could usefully descend into and find my way around.
How and when was that underground developed?
Well, it began, in the prehistoric period, I think, when caves have been discovered. It continues right up to today with modern Ministry of Defence buildings. It's often forgotten that the tube itself is, I think, finished in the 1850s, 1860s, the subway. So we can easily imagine Jack the Ripper or Oscar Wilde, for example, taking the tube. It's a much older system than people imagine.
60 million people or so living in England now. How many of those people are in London, and is London's influence outsized in this nation?
You'd have to ask a demographer about the precise number of citizens, of people in London. I think it is something in the order of 13 million, but I may be a couple of million out. But whatever the number, the important thing is that the influence of London, the aura of London, has for the last 2,000 years shaped the perception of England and has also shaped the nature of its economic and social climate. It has always been, in every sense, the centre of the nation. And I don't see any chance of that centrality changing over the next few generations.
As you write your history of England, how much of that history is royal history?
I hope not as much as it has been in the first couple of volumes, where the monarchs play a much larger role in the history than they do in later centuries. As we go forward into the 18th and 19th and 20th centuries, the role of the monarchy lessens until it becomes almost invisible.
But we talk about the Elizabethan era, the Victorian era. Will we at some point talk about the QE2 era?
The QE2?
The Queen Elizabeth II
era?
Sorry, I went American on you.
I don't know if yes, I suppose we'll be talking about the Elizabethan era, the second Elizabethan era. Sorry. Yes, I suppose we will begin to talk about the second Elizabethan era, only because it's a very handy prop for historians and biographers to name